Ethan Cole had been on exactly 17 diplomatic missions in his career, and not one of them had prepared him for this. The crystalline palace of Luminara stretched above him like frozen music, its towers humming with energy that made his bones vibrate in ways he couldn't quite explain. The Nyxaran guards flanking him moved in perfect silence, their elongated ears twitching occasionally as they monitored frequencies his human hearing couldn't detect. He'd spent 3 months negotiating trade agreements with mid-level Nyxaran officials who treated every conversation like a chess match played in slow motion. Progress had been glacial, mistrust mutual, and the coffee, well, there wasn't any coffee, which Ethan considered a violation of basic diplomatic courtesy. Now, apparently, he'd graduated to the main event. The throne room doors opened with a sound like singing crystal, and Ethan was ushered into a space that defied his understanding of architecture. The ceiling seemed both impossibly high and intimately close, and the floor reflected not his image but some idealized version of himself that made him deeply uncomfortable. Queen Velara sat upon a throne carved from a single piece of amber starlight. At least, that's what it looked like. She was everything the briefings had described and nothing like he'd imagined. Silver hair cascaded past her shoulders in a way that seemed to defy gravity, and her ice-blue eyes studied him with the intensity of someone reading a document in a foreign language. Beside her stood Princess Lyria, the heir apparent. Golden hair, amber eyes, and a posture that suggested she'd been trained from birth to never slouch even slightly. Her ears, like her mother's, were elegantly elongated and adorned with delicate silver jewelry that caught the ambient light. "Ambassador Cole," Queen Velara said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the air shimmer, "you have traveled far. Your Majesty, it's an honor." Ethan bowed exactly 15 degrees, as protocol demanded. He'd practiced in his quarters until his back ached. "Though I should clarify, I'm not actually an ambassador. I'm a trade envoy. 3rd class. I mostly handle agricultural commodities and mineral rights." A slight ripple moved through the assembled Nyxaran nobles. Ethan couldn't tell if it was amusement or offense. "Modesty," Velara observed. "Or honesty. With your kind, it is sometimes difficult to distinguish." "With respect, Your Majesty, it's usually both. We humans are complicated that way." This time, the reaction was clearer. Several nobles exchanged glances. Princess Lyria's expression remained perfectly neutral, but Ethan caught the briefest flicker of something in her eyes. Curiosity, surprise. Queen Velara rose from her throne, descending the crystalline steps with fluid grace. She moved like water finding its level, each step deliberate and somehow inevitable. When she stood before Ethan, he was struck by how human she looked, except for the ears, and the way light seemed to bend slightly around her, and the sensation that she was simultaneously there and somewhere else entirely. 3 months of negotiations, Velara said softly, though her voice carried throughout the chamber. 3 months of careful words and calculated gestures. My advisors tell me you are either exceptionally patient or exceptionally incompetent. I prefer to think of myself as persistently optimistic, Ethan replied. You have spent considerable time in conversation with my daughter during these negotiations. Ethan felt the temperature in the room drop several degrees. This was clearly the moment every diplomat dreaded, the point where personal and professional boundaries collided in spectacular fashion. Princess Lyria has been gracious enough to help me understand Nyxaran customs, yes. She's been an invaluable resource for. Do you desire my daughter? The question hit like a physical blow. Ethan's carefully prepared diplomatic responses evaporated instantly. Around the room, he could sense the nobles leaning forward imperceptibly, waiting for his answer. This was a test, obviously, but what kind? What answer would doom the negotiations? What answer would save them? Princess Lyria remained perfectly still, but Ethan noticed her hands had tightened slightly on the ceremonial staff she carried. He could lie, could offer flowery praise about the princess's beauty and grace. could deflect with diplomatic ambiguity, could claim that personal feelings were irrelevant to professional duties. Instead, Ethan heard himself speaking with an honesty that terrified him even as the words left his mouth. "No, Your Majesty. I don't desire your daughter." The silence that followed was so complete that Ethan could hear his own heartbeat. He pressed forward, knowing he'd already crossed the line and might as well see where it led. "I don't desire her power, though she will one day rule an empire that spans 17 systems. I don't desire her beauty, though by any species standards she is remarkable. I don't desire the political advantage that such a connection might bring, though my superiors on Earth would probably sacrifice several minor colonies for that opportunity." Ethan took a breath, meeting Queen Velara's eyes directly, another protocol violation, but he was already so far past protocol that it hardly mattered. "What I feel for Princess Lyria is respect. Respect for her courage in engaging with a species her people have distrusted for decades. Respect for her patience in teaching me about Nyxaran culture without making me feel like an idiot, even though I've committed approximately 47 social errors in her presence. Respect for her heart, which I've seen in the way she speaks about her people, her responsibilities, and the future she wants to build." He paused, then added with a slight smile, "Also, she has an excellent sense of humor when she thinks no one important is watching. That deserves respect too." The silence stretched. Queen Velara's expression was unreadable, her eyes searching his face as if looking for cracks in his sincerity. The assembled nobles seemed to have forgotten to breathe. Then, impossibly, Ethan saw tears forming in Queen Velara's eyes. The reaction was instantaneous: gasps from the nobles, a sharp intake of breath from Princess Lyria, and a ripple of shock that moved through the chamber like a wave. A Nyxaran queen didn't cry, didn't show weakness, didn't allow emotion to compromise the perfect mask of royal authority. But Queen Velara's tears were real, sliding down her cheeks in silence as she continued to stare at Ethan. "In 300 years of rule," she said, her voice steady despite the tears, "countless suitors have approached my daughter. Kings, warriors, scientists, artists, all of them spoke of desire, of what they wanted from her, of what possessing her would bring them." She reached up to touch her own face, as if surprised to find moisture there. "You are the first to speak of what you give her, respect, the first to see her as something other than an acquisition." Velara's voice broke slightly. "The first to answer with a truth so simple it pierces through 3 centuries of royal cynicism." Ethan stood frozen, uncertain whether he just saved the negotiations or destroyed them completely. Queen Velara turned to her daughter, and Ethan saw something pass between them, a wordless communication that spoke of years of burden, of duty without choice, of being viewed as a symbol rather than a person. When Velara looked back at Ethan, her tears had stopped but her expression had transformed. The mask of the untouchable queen had cracked, revealing something more human underneath. "Tomorrow, Ambassador Cole, yes, I am promoting you as of this moment. We will resume negotiations. But tonight, you will dine with my daughter and me. Not as envoy and royalty, but as 3 people attempting to understand one another across the vast distance between worlds." She gestured and servants materialized from the shadows. "Take our guest to the Azure Wing. Give him every comfort." As Ethan was being escorted out, he glanced back. Princess Lyria was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Surprise, certainly, but something else. Recognition, perhaps, or the beginning of something that hadn't existed before. Queen Velara had returned to her throne, but her hand remained pressed to her chest, over her heart. The tears were gone, but their impact remained visible in the way every noble in the chamber looked at her differently now. Ethan Cole, third-class trade envoy turned impromptu ambassador, walked through crystalline corridors wondering how a simple, honest answer had just shattered 3 centuries of diplomatic precedent. Behind him, in the throne room, Queen Velara sat in silence, feeling an emotion she hadn't experienced in decades: hope. The azure wing turned out to be less a wing and more a small palace within the palace, complete with rooms that adjusted their ambience based on his emotional state, which Ethan found both impressive and mildly invasive. When he'd entered feeling anxious, the walls had shifted to a calming blue. When he'd laughed at the absurdity of his situation, they'd brightened to something like sunrise. He was currently staring at a ceiling that displayed what he hoped was a simulation of Luminara's night sky and not actual exposed space, when someone knocked with a pattern that sounded like music. Princess Lyria entered without waiting for permission, which Ethan suspected was a royal prerogative. She changed from her formal regalia into something simpler, though simple for Nyxaran royalty, still involved fabric that seemed woven from liquid silver and jewelry that hummed with subtle energy. "You confused my mother," Lyria said without preamble. "I didn't think that was possible. I confused myself, to be honest. Was I supposed to lie? Everyone lies to royalty. It's considered polite." She moved to the window, which overlooked gardens that defied several laws of botany Ethan vaguely remembered from school. "You saw my mother cry." "I did. No one has seen that in 70 years, not since my father died." Lyria's fingers traced patterns on the window glass that left faint luminescent trails. "She loved him, you know. Genuinely loved him, before politics and power, and 3 centuries of ruling an empire ground away everything soft in her heart." "I don't think it ground away as much as she thinks," Ethan said carefully. Lyria turned to face him, and Ethan was struck by how much younger she seemed without the formal mask. She was still a princess, still carried herself with innate grace, but there was vulnerability in her eyes that hadn't been visible in the throne room. "Why did you say that? About respecting me?" "Because it's true. You could have said you desired me. My mother would have approved. Political marriages between our peoples would cement the alliance." "Would you have wanted that?" The question clearly caught her off guard. "What I want is rarely relevant to what I do." "That sounds exhausting." "It's duty." But the way she said it suggested it was also prison. Ethan gestured to a sitting area that had grown from the floor when he'd thought about wanting somewhere to sit. Nyxaran architecture was disturbingly responsive. "Can I ask you something potentially rude? You've already made my mother cry in public. I think we're past politeness." "Fair point." Ethan sat, and after a moment's hesitation, Lyria joined him. "When was the last time someone asked what you wanted? Not what the empire needed, not what duty demanded. Just what you, personally, wanted." Lyria was quiet for so long that Ethan wondered if he'd crossed a line after all. Finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't remember." "That's heartbreaking. That's royalty." She met his eyes. "You humans have a saying, don't you? Heavy is the head that wears the crown." "We do. Though I always thought it was a bit dramatic. Turns out it's more accurate than I realized." Despite herself, Lyria smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face entirely. "You're nothing like what I expected from a human diplomat." "What did you expect?" "Someone more calculating, more focused on advantage, more like our nobles." "To be fair, I am focused on advantage. I'm just really bad at hiding my actual personality while doing it." Ethan grinned. "It's a character flaw that's probably going to end my diplomatic career, but it makes parties more interesting." This time Lyria laughed, a sound of pure surprise and delight. "You made a joke about being a bad diplomat while conducting diplomacy. That's either brilliant or insane. Why not both?" The laughter continued, and Ethan noticed the room's ambient lighting had shifted to something warmer, more golden. Lyria noticed too, glancing around with an expression of wonder. "The palace responds to emotions," she explained. "But it's been years since I've felt anything strongly enough to trigger it." She looked back at Ethan. "You're dangerous, Ambassador Cole." "Ethan, and how am I dangerous? I can barely navigate your formal dining protocols without using the wrong utensil. Last week I apparently insulted a duke by sitting in the wrong direction. You're dangerous because you're genuine. Because you say things that make people feel, and feeling is the most dangerous thing in a court built on calculated composure. Lyria's expression grew more serious. My mother has ruled for 300 years by never showing weakness. Today, you made her cry in front of her entire council. That changes everything. Should I apologize? No. Lyria shook her head. You should understand what you've done. Those tears weren't weakness. They were proof that humanity possesses something we've lost. Sincerity without agenda, honesty without calculation. My mother has been surrounded by people who want something from her for centuries. You're the first person in my lifetime who wanted nothing except to be truthful. Ethan absorbed this, feeling the weight of it. I'm just a guy who negotiates grain shipments, Lyria. I'm not some profound philosopher. Perhaps that's exactly why it matters. She stood, moving back toward the door. Tomorrow night you'll dine with us. My mother wants to understand your species better. She wants to understand what kind of people can produce someone who values respect over desire. No pressure then. None whatsoever. Lyria paused at the threshold. Ethan, thank you for seeing me as something other than a crown to be won. After she left, Ethan sat in the responsive room, watching the colors shift through sunset hues. Somewhere in this crystalline palace, he'd apparently triggered a diplomatic revolution by simply telling the truth. His communicator chimed, a message from Earth's diplomatic corps, finally reaching him through the Nyxaran communication network. His supervisor wanted a status update on the negotiations. Ethan stared at the message for a long moment, then typed, "Made the Queen cry. Might have accidentally changed 3 centuries of royal protocol. Also, possibly friends with a princess now. Will explain later. Send coffee." He deleted it and wrote something more professional, but the original sentiment remained accurate. Outside his window, Luminara's triple moons rose over impossible gardens, and Ethan Cole, third-class envoy turned impromptu ambassador, wondered what tomorrow's dinner would bring. In her private chambers, Queen Velara stood before a mirror, studying her own reflection as if seeing it for the first time in decades. Her daughter found her there, and they stood together in silence. "He's unusual," Velara said finally. "He's human," Lyria replied. "Yes, perhaps that's what we needed." The Queen touched her cheek where tears had fallen. "Perhaps that's what I'd forgotten was possible." The dinner began with what Ethan could only describe as weaponized formality. The dining hall was smaller than the throne room, but no less intimidating, with a table that appeared to be carved from a single piece of luminescent stone. Each place setting included approximately 17 pieces of cutlery whose purposes Ethan could only guess at. Queen Velara sat at the head of the table, with Lyria on her right and Ethan on her left. Between them, servers moved with choreographed precision, presenting dishes that defied categorization. One appeared to be a crystal that dissolved into flavor on contact with tongue. Another was a form of meat that changed texture based on how you thought about it. "Ambassador Cole," Velara began, her tone more relaxed than in the throne room, "my daughter tells me you have a talent for inappropriate honesty." "It's one of my core competencies, Your Majesty." "Demonstrate." Ethan paused with something that might have been a vegetable halfway to his mouth. "Right now. Consider it a test." "All right." Ethan set down the utensil, probably the wrong one. "I think your formal dining protocols are designed to intimidate visitors into submission through sheer confusion. I have no idea what half these utensils do, and I'm reasonably certain I've been eating the garnish and ignoring the actual food." Lyria made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Queen Velara's expression remained neutral, but Ethan caught a slight twitch of her elongated ears that he was learning to recognize as amusement. "Continue," Velara said. "I think your people have built such an elaborate culture of perfection that you've forgotten how to be imperfect together. And I think that's lonely, even if you're too practiced at dignity to admit it." The silence that followed was broken by Velara's genuine laughter, not the polite acknowledgement of humor, but actual laughter that filled the hall. "You are either the bravest human I've met or the most foolish." Definitely the most foolish. Bravery implies choice, and I just can't seem to help myself. The dinner shifted after that exchange. Formality didn't disappear, but it relaxed enough for actual conversation. Velara asked about Earth, about human governance and culture, and the mistakes humanity had made in reaching for the stars. Ethan answered honestly, perhaps too honestly, describing the wars, the failed colonies, the slow and painful process of learning to cooperate across national and planetary boundaries. "We're messy," he concluded. "We argue constantly, make terrible decisions regularly, and our council meetings sometimes devolve into what we politely call heated debate and what everyone else calls shouting matches. But we keep trying." "That sounds chaotic," Lyria observed. "It is, but it's also real. We don't have 3 centuries of practice perfection to draw on. We're just figuring things out as we go and hoping we don't destroy ourselves in the process." "And yet you've built an interstellar alliance," Velara said thoughtfully. "Perhaps there is wisdom in acknowledging imperfection rather than hiding it." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Lord Cayley's, a silver-haired noble whose elongated ears bore so much jewelry they seemed to droop under the weight. His expression as he entered suggested he just discovered something distasteful on his shoe. "Your Majesty, I apologize for the interruption, but there are matters requiring your attention." "Lord Cayley's." Velara's tone cooled noticeably. "I was not aware you had an appointment. The council grows concerned about certain developments." His eyes slid to Ethan with undisguised disdain. "The presence of this human in your private chambers is generating unfortunate speculation." "The only unfortunate thing is your interruption of dinner, Cayley's." Lyria's voice was ice. "Princess, with respect, your mother's judgment may be compromised by—" "Choose your next words carefully," Velara warned. Cayley smiled without warmth. "I merely suggest that this human's influence grows disproportionate to his station. Surely your Majesty recognizes the danger of allowing a member of an inferior species such intimate access to the royal family." Ethan had been trying to stay quiet, to let the Nyxarans handle their internal politics, but the word inferior triggered something he couldn't suppress. "Lord Cayley's, I have a question." The noble turned to him with an expression of profound irritation. "The human speaks. How novel. When you look at Princess Lyria, what do you see?" "I see the heir to the Nyxaran Empire, obviously." "That's interesting, because I see a person, someone with thoughts and hopes and fears, someone who carries an impossible burden with grace but who deserves to be seen as more than a crown waiting to be won." Ethan stood, knowing he was violating every protocol but finding he didn't care. "You called humanity inferior, but here's the thing. We learned centuries ago that seeing other people as things to be possessed or controlled is the actual mark of inferiority. You see Lyria as an acquisition. I see her as a person. Which one of us is truly lesser?" Lord Cayley's face flushed dark. "How dare you?" "He dares because he speaks truth, Cayley's." Lyria had also stood, and her voice carried a command Ethan had never heard before. "Something you seem to have forgotten in your decades of scheming to marry your son to me against my wishes. Your wishes are irrelevant to dynastic necessity. My wishes are the only thing that should be relevant." Lyria's shout echoed through the hall, and Ethan saw genuine shock on Cayley's face. "I am tired of being treated as a piece on your political game board. I am tired of nobles who see me as a prize to be won rather than a person to be known. And I am especially tired of men like you who think your schemes entitle you to my future." Queen Velara had risen as well, and the ambient harmonics of the room shifted to support her authority. "Lord Cayley's, you will leave, now." "Your Majesty, the Council." "The Council serves at my pleasure, not the reverse. And I am rapidly losing any pleasure in your presence." Cayley's retreated, but his parting glance at Ethan promised future trouble. After he left, the 3 of them stood in silence for a moment. "Well," Ethan said finally, "I definitely just made everything worse, didn't I?" No, Velara said softly. You made everything clearer. Lyria moved to the window, her shoulders tense. Ethan followed, standing beside her but not touching. You defended me, she said quietly. Someone should have done it centuries ago. No one ever has. She turned to face him, and Ethan saw tears forming in her eyes, the same tears he'd seen in her mother's. Do you understand what you've done? You've shown me what it's like to be seen. Actually seen not as a crown or a treaty or a political advantage, just seen. You deserve that, everyone does. Not everyone gets it. Lyria wiped at her eyes, especially not royalty. Queen Velara joined them at the window, and for a moment, the three of them stood together looking out at the crystalline gardens where impossible plants grew in the light of triple moons. Ambassador Cole, Ethan, Velara corrected herself. You have given me an unexpected gift. You've reminded me that power without compassion is just tyranny with better furniture. That 3 centuries of practiced perfection means nothing if we've lost the ability to simply be genuine with one another. Your Majesty, You're just honest, and that is revolutionary in a court that's forgotten what honesty sounds like. She smiled, and it transformed her entire face. I believe our negotiations are concluded, Ambassador. The trade agreement will be finalized tomorrow, with terms favorable to both our peoples. Just like that, because you've proven something important, that humanity values people over power. That's a quality worth building an alliance with. Later, as Ethan returned to his quarters through corridors that hummed with evening harmonics, he was intercepted by a figure in dark clothing. His hand went instinctively to his communicator, but the figure spoke before he could trigger an alarm. Ambassador, I represent Lord Cayley's. He wishes you to understand that challenging him was unwise. Before Ethan could respond, a blade that looked like crystallized sound appeared in the figure's hand. Ethan had exactly enough time to think. This is a really stupid way to die before guards materialized from shadows, their weapons drawn. The assassin was subdued in seconds, and Ethan found himself surrounded by Nyxaran royal guards, who looked deeply annoyed at having to protect a human from noble-sponsored murder. In her chambers, Queen Velara received the news of the assassination attempt with cold fury. Beside her, Lyria's hands trembled. This is my fault, Lyria whispered. Cayley's targeted him because I defended him. No, Velara said firmly. This is Cayley's fault, and he has just made his final mistake. The queen stood, her expression hardening into something ancient and terrible. Summon the council. It's time they learned what happens when someone threatens those under my protection. The council chamber at dawn held a different energy than during formal sessions. The light streaming through crystal walls cast prismatic shadows, and the assembled nobles looked distinctly uncomfortable at being summoned with such urgency. Lord Cayley stood at the center, his usual confidence replaced by poorly concealed anxiety. Queen Velara entered with Lyria and Ethan flanking her, a deliberate statement of unity that sent ripples of whispers through the chamber. Lord Cayley's, Velara's voice was ice-given sound. An assassin bearing your house seal attempted to murder Ambassador Cole last night. Explain. Your Majesty, I assure you this is a misunderstanding. The assassin confessed before his execution. Velara produced a recording crystal that projected the killer's testimony for all to witness. You ordered the death of a diplomatic envoy under my personal protection, an act of treason, Lord Cayley's, and an act of war against humanity. The chamber erupted. Nobles who had supported Cayley's political maneuvering suddenly found themselves backing away from association with actual assassination. The old lord's face cycled through fury, fear, and finally resignation. The human is corrupting your judgment, my queen. He's bewitched both you and your daughter with his. With his honesty, Velara's laugh was sharp. With his refusal to see my daughter as an object to be possessed. Yes, how absolutely corrupting. She descended from her position, moving to stand before Cayley's. You want to know what's truly corrupting? 3 centuries of nobles like you treating my daughter as a political prize. 3 centuries of scheming and manipulation. 3 centuries of everyone around me wanting something. She turned to address the full council. Ambassador Ethan Cole asked my daughter a simple question. When was the last time someone asked what she wanted? She couldn't remember. Do you understand how profoundly we've failed as a civilization when our heir cannot remember being seen as a person rather than a position? Councillor Marin, a younger noble who had remained neutral through most political battles, spoke up. Your Majesty, if I may, the human's impact on this court has been unusual. Unusual how? He makes people feel things. Marin glanced at Ethan. Genuine things, not the calculated emotions we perform for political advantage. In 3 days, he's caused more authentic emotional response in this palace than I've witnessed in decades. Is that a criticism? Velara asked. No, Your Majesty, it's an observation. Perhaps we've forgotten that diplomacy doesn't have to be a performance. Perhaps we've lost something by treating every interaction as a strategic game. Lord Cayley sputtered. This is absurd. One human speaks a few pretty words and suddenly 300 years of tradition. Tradition, Lyria's voice cut through his protest, or comfortable cruelty disguised as custom. She moved to stand beside her mother. I've spent my entire life being perfect, being what everyone needed me to be, crown princess, diplomatic tool, future treaty signed in flesh instead of paper. And in 3 days, a human trade envoy has shown me more genuine respect than anyone in this chamber has offered in a century. She turned to face the assembled nobles, and Ethan saw the transformation. Not just princess, but future queen finding her voice. You want to know why my mother cried? Because someone finally looked at me and saw a person worth respecting rather than a throne worth claiming. That simple truth, that basic dignity, was so foreign to this court that it broke through 3 centuries of practiced composure. If that's corruption, then corrupt us more. The silence that followed was profound. Even Cayley seemed to recognize he'd lost. Queen Velara pronounced sentence with swift finality. Lord Cayleys, you are stripped of title and lands. You will be exiled to the outer territories. Your conspiracy dies with your departure. She looked around the chamber. Let this be understood. Any attack on Ambassador Cole or any human diplomat will be considered an attack on me personally. As guards escorted Cayleys out, Velara addressed the remaining council. The trade agreement with humanity will be ratified today. Furthermore, we are establishing a cultural exchange program. If one human can remind us of our own capacity for genuine connection, imagine what we might learn from deeper contact. Councillor Marin stepped forward. Your Majesty, with respect. Many in the outer systems remain skeptical of humanity. This agreement will face opposition. Then we will address that opposition with the same weapon Ambassador Cole used: truth. Velara smiled. The truth that 2 civilizations can find common ground not through calculated strategy, but through simple mutual respect. The formal treaty signing took place later that day. Ethan stood beside representatives from Earth's diplomatic corps who had arrived overnight, looking distinctly confused about how their third-class envoy had somehow revolutionized 3 centuries of Nyxaran politics. But the real moment came afterward, in the gardens where impossible plants grew under triple moons. Ethan found Lyria there, standing beneath a tree that sang in harmonic tones. You're leaving tomorrow, she said without turning. My mission's complete. Earth wants me back to debrief. Ethan moved to stand beside her, though I suspect that debriefing is going to be several weeks of people asking how I accidentally caused a diplomatic revolution. You didn't cause it, you revealed it. Lyria finally looked at him. Ethan, I need to tell you something. You've developed feelings for me, and you're terrified because I'm leaving and you're a crown princess who can't just run off with a human trade envoy. And this is all very complicated. She stared at him. How did you? Because I'm developing feelings too, and I'm equally terrified. Because you deserve someone who can give you the world, and I'm just a guy who knows way too much about grain futures. I don't want someone who can give me the world. I want someone who sees me. Tears formed in her eyes, those same tears that seemed to be becoming a theme. You gave me something I didn't know I'd lost, the freedom to be imperfect, the permission to just be. Ethan reached out, then hesitated. Can I? She nodded, and he took her hand. The first physical contact between them beyond formal greetings. Her fingers were warm, and he felt a slight harmonic vibration through her skin. I can't stay, Lyria. My life is on Earth, and yours is here, preparing to rule an empire. I know, she squeezed his hand. But you've changed everything anyway. You've shown me that I don't have to be what everyone expects, that there's value in being genuine, even when it's messy. Especially when it's messy. She pulled out a small crystal pendant. The kind Ethan had learned was called a heart bond in Nyxaran culture. This is meant to be given to someone you'll remember forever, someone who changed you. Ethan took it carefully. What does it do? It resonates with your biorhythms. Whenever you hold it, you'll feel an echo of this moment, of this connection. She smiled through tears. I want you to remember that a princess of an ancient empire thought you were worth knowing. Not for what you could give her, but for who you were. Lyria, I don't make promises about the future. Just promise me you'll keep being exactly who you are. Keep being honest and awkward and inappropriate. Keep making people feel things. The galaxy needs more of that. They stood together as the triple moons rose. Two people from impossibly different worlds sharing a moment of perfect understanding. Tomorrow, Ethan would board a ship bound for Earth. Tomorrow, Lyria would resume her duties as crown princess. But tonight, they were just two people who had found each other across the vast distance between stars. In her private chambers, Queen Velara watched them through the window, her own heart bond crystal, her late husband's, clutched in her hand. Tears fell freely now without shame. You would have liked him, she whispered to the memory of her beloved. He reminded me what we used to be, before duty hardened us, before perfection became prison. Counselor Marin found her there. Your Majesty, the reports are coming in. The outer systems are responding positively to news of the treaty. They're calling it the beginning of a new era. It is, Velara said softly. Not because of trade agreements or political alliances, but because one honest human reminded us that strength lies not in perfection, but in the courage to be genuine. 6 months later, Ethan Cole stood before a committee on Earth, trying to explain how he'd accidentally revolutionized human Nyxaran relations. So you're saying, his supervisor said slowly, that you caused a 300-year-old queen to cry by being respectful? Essentially, yes. And this somehow led to the most favorable trade agreement in human diplomatic history. Also, yes. Cole, you're either the luckiest idiot in the diplomatic corps or a secret genius. Can it be both? The heart bond crystal hung around his neck, and occasionally, especially late at night when Earth's single moon rose, he would hold it and feel the echo of triple moons, impossible gardens, and a princess who had taught him that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply let yourself be seen. On Luminara, Princess Lyria stood on her balcony, her own matching crystal glowing softly. Across the impossible distance between worlds, two hearts remembered. And Queen Velara, watching her daughter smile at the stars, allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, the galaxy was learning what one human had taught them, that compassion could bridge even the stars, and that the courage to be genuine was the most revolutionary force in the universe.